I may have overdone it on this one. Sorry neighbours. Alright, so it's finally time to get stuck into the Cuore. So I need to do the flywheel and put the clutch on and put the gearbox on, and then this can go back in the car. So I haven't touched this for ages, so I'm just going to have a quick look over and make sure everything is tight and everything's on that needs to go on before it goes in the car. So the main thing here is this plate. A lot of people call them different things. I call them a sandwich plate, so they just go between the block and the gearbox. So make sure that's on before you put the flywheel on, because otherwise you won't be able to do it. And then just check everything, make sure it's all tight, and make sure you're happy before you put it in. So I've got a few things here. I've got thread locker, I've got the ARP bolts and the bolts for the pressure plate that go in the top of the pressure plate. I've got the sockets, the correct size. I've got a torque wrench. I've got some brake cleaner. I've got a rag, big old spanner to hold the crank bolt, and then the new thrust bearing. I need to grab some grease, or I might be able to use this stuff. I'll have to have a look. And then the new clutch, which I'm not sure if I've shown you. So we've got this custom made from NPC. It's pretty spicy, so it should be pretty fun. So what I'm going to do first today is run this bolt in and out of all the holes a few times with a bit of brake cleaner on it, just to clean out these threads, and then spray in the threads and just get everything nice and clean. Alright, so I've gone around twice, threaded this in and out. So all I'm doing is just making sure that these threads are nice and clean. So when I first started, it was actually quite crunchy to screw this bolt in, but now it's quite easy. It's real smooth. So now what I'm going to do is just clean off the brake cleaner and degreaser or whatever it is. Just clean all this surface up, put the flywheel on and just do a test fit. So I'll put the bolts in with no lube and no Loctite, and just make sure it all fits together, make sure the bolts are the right length. These are actually for a Toyota 2ZZ GE. So they're not the right bolts. This is a 3K Daihatsu motor, but they were the right thread pitch, and I'm pretty sure they're the right length. So they may be a touch too long, in which case I'll have to get some washers. So hopefully these will fit. So I'm just going to test fit everything and make sure it all looks good, because otherwise if they're too long and you don't put any washers in there, the flywheel will be loose and it can wobble and break bolts and come loose and all that sort of stuff. Or if it's too short and it's got like one thread of engagement, it could come off. So you don't want any of those things to happen, because this is a pretty serious thing. If this is revving to 5,000 or 6,000, which is pretty easy for it, and that flywheel comes off, it's going through the floor and possibly through your leg. So do this properly. So just test fit all the bolts. It's all nice, and the flywheel's got no give in it. Perfect. So Dale rocked up at the perfect time and just gave me a hand to hold the harmonic balancer bolt. So like I was saying before, check everything before you put it back in, because the harmonic balancer bolt was actually loose. So we've tightened that up, and we've tightened the flywheel and put that on. So I've just quickly finger tight put these bolts back on and put the pressure plate and the clutch plate in there. So with the front wheel drive, I haven't got the input shaft lining tool. So what I'm going to do is just try and eyeball it and get that in the center, and then do up these bolts around the outside. And then the gearbox can go back on. Alright, so I've got the clutch bolted on and the pressure plate bolted on, obviously. Loctited and torqued. So now I've had the gearbox on and off a couple of times to make sure it's actually centered, but you can guarantee it'll be out again. So the next thing to do is I just wiped out all the cobwebs and the dirt and all the loose stuff from inside the bell housing, and we need to replace the thrust bearing, which is this guy here. So I've got a new one, and I've got a bit of lube, which is bushing lube, which is probably not the right stuff, but it's better than nothing. So pop this out, lube it up, put the new one on. Here we have the old bearing and the new bearing. So you can hear that one, which this one's nice and smooth and a little bit tight. So a new one's always good. When you're in here, it's good to do it, regardless of whether that's the problem or not. This is quite a pain to get to. You obviously have to take the gearbox out and replace it in here. So the new one slides onto this shaft, but I'm just going to put a bit of lube on here so it can freely go up and down with the clutch fork, which is that guy there. So just lube that up, pop that on, put the clip on, and we'll be good to go and put the gearbox onto the engine. Alright, so it's a new day. Last night I did a bad job of filming, but we got the gearbox on, got the thrust bearing on, got the clutch, the pressure plate and the flywheel back on, all torqued to spec, all Loctited, and everything's all sweet. So now today Emily's off work, she's going to clean the gearbox because I don't want to do it. And I'm going to look at the engine bay and make sure everything's ready in the engine bay, ready for everything to go back in. And then we'll probably add the rack to the subframe, add some lower control arms, sway bar, all that sort of stuff, and get it ready to put the engine back into the Cuore. So hopefully a good day. We'll see how we go. I'm going to go to work this afternoon, so we haven't got a whole lot of time. But next couple of days should be back in and close to firing up again. Obviously not with the turbo yet. Alright, so I've had a quick look at the engine bay. So I just ran some wires and plugged them back in where they're supposed to be. Just moved all the stuff that's supposed to be hanging out the front. That's all been tucked away for quite a while. So we've got the headlights on this side, headlights on that side, that's fine. We've got the carbon canister, which I need to get out of the way when we put the engine in. And then we got fuel line, which is tucked away, the clutch cable, which is tucked away, and the accelerator cable. So that's pretty much it. We've got to put the heater lines back on when we go back in and put the engine loom back in as well. So I'm going to clean this and give it a bit of a detail, so when the engine goes back in we've already gotten to all the hard to reach places. So I've also jacked all this up and got it hanging reasonably level with some straps. So now Emily can clean the gearbox. So I'll push it out the front and move the wheel air and stuff and just push it out there. So Em can clean the gearbox. And then I remembered that the belt's not on. And there's a few tensioners and stuff missing. So I'm going to try and find the belt in this pile of stuff here and try and get the front of the engine assembled, because I don't want to do that once it's in the car. And then I'll find the old suspension, which is over behind the car, and put in the rack and the lower control arms and maybe the sway bar before we put it all back on the ground. So I think that's all we need to do before we put this back in the car. I'm just looking around just to make sure. So we've got a mixture of radiator hoses and stuff up the top which I have to sort out, but I can do that in the car. So it's pretty much just the rack, clean it, put it in. So just giving the engine bay a quick wipe over and checked everything over to make sure we've got all the bits and pieces. So it's looking pretty good. It's still filthy, but we've got like all the leaves and crap out and cleaned all underneath the wipers. Just gave it a nice wipe over, so should be good for the engine to go back in. So the engine's hanging over here with the gearbox ready to be cleaned. So we'll do that this afternoon and then we can start attaching all the last few bits and pieces. I just looked for the new belt and I can't find it, so we're going to go buy another one and hopefully get that on today as well. So one more thing I need to do before we put the engine in is clearance for this pipe. So I think I've shown this in a previous episode. I want this to sit just in there, but it's just borderline too small, the gap that is. So what I want to do is just recess this a little bit and just do like a half curve in there just to make clearance for that pipe so it doesn't rub on anything. So this is where the pipe from the intercooler to the throttle body is going, and then the one from the turbo, which is about here-ish, just goes straight into the intercooler, and then from here to the throttle body. So I need to make clearance for that before I put the engine in, otherwise I'm going to have a hard time. Alright, so we're back from the shop. Got the belt we need, which is apparently made of gold because it was like 70 bucks. So ready to go on the front. Just before we went out, I gave the idler just a little quick coat of paint, and I put some rags under the gearbox so Em can start cleaning that, and we'll get this stuff together. Alright, so we got the tensioner pulley on, that's painted, all tightened down, got the belt on in the correct configuration, which I'm glad I did outside the car because it is a nightmare. So Em's cleaned the gearbox, which I'll show you. Just gave that a scrub, it's heaps better than it was, got all the yellow paint off of it from the wreckers, and gave the whole engine a bit of a blowdown with the air gun and cleaned the subframe. So I've gone over the engine, just checked all the bolts, and everything seems tight. I'll probably miss something, we'll sort it out when we get there. So Em's just cleaning the rack now, and then we'll bolt the rack in. And I've just had a look at the lower control arms and they're still attached to the knuckles and everything, so I'll chuck all that in later. So we'll just do the rack and then put the engine in once I have clearanced this thing. So we've got our little checklist here: mount rack, mount LCAs, mount sway bar, so we're not going to do those just there. I'm going to mount the rack and clearance the intercooler pipe for the right hand side, and then engine in. So we got the rack clean and got the mounts on and everything, chucked it in place, bolted the mounts up, and the top holes line up and the bottom ones don't. So we either need to get YRV steering shackle things, or we need to drill and tap the cross member or die grind it or something. So we're going to have to leave it here for today, I've run out of time. So that's the next problem. And then the intercooler pipe clearance, and then the engine can go in. Alright, so we've got the engine back in. I quickly used the grinder and just shaped this a little bit so the pipe's got a bit more room. And then Emily and I put the engine in. So it's just 4 bolts for the subframe. That's all we've done. Swung it in from the front, lifted it up, and then 4 bolts from the bottom. So that's done. Need to get it rolling now, so that'll be the next job. So that includes putting the lower control arms on, the knuckles on, the sway bar, all that sort of stuff, wheels, and put the brakes back on and all that crap. So that is the next job.